Okay, welcome everybody. Our next speaker here is a very important research scientist for the state of Arizona. While working for the University of Arizona as a fruit tree physiologist and extension specialist, he has enlightened the citizens of Arizona about citrus, date palms, olives, blackberries, and almost every fruit question brought up.
That's because there's nobody else.
Most recently, he has begun a study of pomegranates in Arizona. So I'd like to remind you all to have your cell phones off, please, and we will be answering questions after the presentation. So please welcome Glenn Wright.
Thank you. Do I need the microphone? Okay. I'll start out first by saying that I was hired as the citrus specialist. However, as the U of A has cut positions, and not one of mine not being one of them, I've taken on additional responsibilities. The date palm industry is booming in southwest Arizona. We now have over 3,000 acres on our side of the river. We have a new 40-acre plot of 2-year-old olives for mechanical harvesting for oil. And I received a lot of questions about pomegranates, so I thought I would do a pomegranate project. But this work comes from my background. I spent some time going to Texas A&M University, where we grew blackberries. It was fun. And so I thought, well, why not? Let's see how well blackberries grow in the southwestern part of Arizona. So that's kind of the genesis of this particular project. We'll talk a little bit about raspberries. I also did my PhD work on blueberries, and so we'll talk a little bit about blueberries. You have to have a lot of fortitude if you're going to grow blueberries in southwest Arizona, but I believe it can be done. So let's see what I do to start this thing. There we go. So blackberries. We'll spend most of our time talking about blackberries. We'll talk a small amount of time talking about raspberries and blueberries. And this is a modified talk that I gave at the Desert Horticulture Conference in Tucson. There's been some changes, a little bit of addition, a little bit of subtraction. In that particular talk, I also talked about pitahayas and guavas, but I figured that I probably don't know as much about guavas as the previous speaker, so there's no use in showing my ignorance too many times during the day. So, there are more than 400 species of brambles in North America and South America, from one end of the Western Hemisphere, frankly, to the other, and in the Old World. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Yuma area, but the population in the summertime is about 85,000 people, and in the wintertime it pretty much doubles. And basically all of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho shows up in their Winnebagos. And when I talk to those folks and say, well, I'm going to grow blackberries, they kind of, especially if they come from west of the Cascades, they kind of give me this weird look like, why would anybody want to do that? Because in that part of the world, of course, blackberries and raspberries are considered to be weeds, so you can spray them with Garlon.
Can you use that speaker?
Yes.
I have.
Sure, I certainly can. So, is it working? There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So, so in that part of the world, of course, they're considered to be weeds, and you can spray them with the herbicide and get rid of them. And so they kind of give me this quizzical look when I told them I wanted to work with blackberries. However, and that's certainly true in Texas, where I spent my graduate degrees. You'd go along the roadsides and find blackberries growing wild, and lots of other kinds of berries. So they can be erect or they can be trailing, and they are occasionally useful for ease. Trellises are useful for ease of picking, and from a landscape purpose, they're good as a hedge or a foundation plant. In fact, what I tell people is, if you have a daughter, and you know, in a few years she's going to be a teenager, plant them outside of her bedroom window, okay? And then, well, there's a lot of things you could put outside in front of her bedroom window, like citrus with lots of thorns, but blackberries are probably a good idea, because it makes it difficult for her to get out at night while she's a teenager. So I'm sure some of you fathers have thought about that, so you can you can do that and have some nice landscaping as well. Anyway, so they are considered to be a weed in some places, but we thought we would grow them in Yuma. 85% of them are grown commercially in the Pacific Northwest, and they are commonly found also in the humid southern states, and regularly along the roadsides, etc. And the first publicly funded blackberry breeding program began at Texas A&M University in 1909. I would say that, however, today, at least in the South, the best blackberry breeding program is at the University of Arkansas. And there is also some work done at the USDA in Corvallis, North Carolina, University of Maryland, Ag Canada at Kentville, and several private companies. But I would say probably the best publicly funded one is either the USDA or the work that's done in Arkansas. Also Europe and New Zealand. So there are erect varieties, and they are self-fertile, and there's trailing varieties that require cross-pollination, and we used only the erect varieties. And most blackberries bear fruit on the second year wood known as floricanes. So the first year wood is known as primicanes, and the second year wood is known as floricanes, and they're very easy to tell apart. And we, of course, being in southwest Arizona, we probably have, depending on who you ask, somewhere around 150, at most 200 chill hours a year. We would have to use low chill varieties, and the promise was, the idea then was to take some of the varieties I was familiar with in Texas, add some of the Arkansas varieties to them, and see which one of those varieties was the best. And we actually did this work back in the 1990s. So from Texas, we had the Roseboro and the Bryson and the Womack and the Brazos. Then in our trial, and there are some other varieties available. All the ones pretty much with the Indian names like Kiowa and Apache come from Arkansas. There's the Olali, the Oglawaha, which comes from Arkansas, and the Tupi, which is more of a tropical one. And you can easily find many of these varieties either in nurseries or at the USDA germplasm site. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the USDA and how that works, but you can go to the USDA and you can, as a private citizen, you can order cuttings, or sometimes you will get tissue culture plants. And I will say that they do give some priority. I'm certain that they prioritize who they're going to give plants to, but that doesn't mean that a private citizen can't get them. Not exactly sure what the priority is at the Corvallis site. I'm familiar with the site in Riverside that does citrus and dates, and there are oftentimes private citizens who ask for budwood from that area. So I imagine it's the same in Corvallis. So blackberries are drupes, and of course we're all familiar with drupes from the standpoint of peaches. It is a fruit in which the outer fleshy part, or the exocarp, surrounds the shell, or the pit or the stone, that is the hardened endocarp with the seed inside. So that looks like a peach, but when you put them all together, you have a agglomeration, I guess, of drupelets, okay, or drupes. So the fruits develop from the carpel and from the flowers with superior ovaries. That is, the ones that have the ovaries. It is a description of how the ovary relates to the petals of the flower, and the pit itself is derived from the ovary wall of the flower. So that's a drupe, like you would think of a peach or a apricot. And then they aggregate, and they call each one of them is called a druplet. So blackberries are aggregates of drupelets in a cluster. And I don't know about you, but some of those hard seeds off of those druplet parts get caught in my teeth, and so you know how that works. So blackberries are different from raspberries in that blackberries accumulate purple pigment rather than red or yellow. There are some, of course, they start out red, but typically they will end up being purple or more blackish than raspberries will. the stems of blackberries will stay on the berry. So when you pull them off, you won't plug them like you would with a raspberry. And the fruit, I mean, raspberries are soft enough as it is, but a blackberry is even softer than a raspberry. And so you have to be careful because you can damage them when you pick them, the blackberries. You can. And they typically yield better than raspberries. Blackberries do, and they're a little bit less tolerant of cold weather, but they can withstand the heat. So it's more difficult to find raspberries that are suitable for southwestern Arizona as compared with blackberries, though we'll talk about them. Blackberry canes are thornier, although there are some thornless varieties now, and they can be upright or they can be trailing. But again, in our little study, all we did was look at the upright varieties. And they typically produce fruit on the previous season's canes, that is the flora canes, which die after bearing fruit. And that means then that you have to go and prune them out, which in our area typically was sometime around the 15th of June, which made the work quite wonderful. So, we established this little trial based on my love of blackberries at Texas A&M, and we ordered plants from Womack's Nursery in De Leon, Texas, and you can see the website there. And we had 7 different varieties. We had 4 Texas selections, and we had 3 Arkansas selections. And I don't know if I know some of you have been to Yuma because it's the potty stop between Phoenix and San Diego. But if you ever get out of the area where the freeway is and you head south, we have this thing called the Yuma Mesa, and it's blow sand. And so I thought, well, why not? Why not just give them as much hardship as I could, and we'll just plant them direct on the blow sand, and we'll see what happens. So the blow sand is called superstition sand, and we put them at 4 feet within a row by 12 feet between rows, probably because we had a pre-existing irrigation system that we had there, and so we irrigated them with this irrigation system. That was the spacing of the irrigation system. You can certainly put them closer together depending on what your purpose is for the landscape. But if you know anything about blackberries, you know that even if you keep them apart, they will grow together, and they will grow all over the place. And so here is the second year. You can see the sand. It's pretty much like planting them on the beach. But we had the irrigation, and they really did do quite well. And so we started out with this irrigation system. It was kind of a gravity feed kind of drip irrigation system. But later on, we moved to the more typical flood irrigation system that we use up there because, we just found that it was easier to deal with. And once the plants were established, we didn't have to use the drip system anymore, but you could. So, and to establish, we planted in February. We got bare root plants. We put them and we irrigated them every day for the first month or so to establish them, and then we moved to every 2 days. And then it got to the point where, the lines were underneath there, and of course with the thorns, it became difficult to inspect the lines to see whether or not they were, irrigating properly. So we abandoned that, and we moved to flood irrigation. And of course, what happened is, not surprisingly, is the berries tended to start putting off shoots in the middle of the rows, which they will do because blackberries are incredibly prolific. They're kind of like the rabbits of the plant world, I guess. They of course, you can grow them by cuttings. I suppose you can grow them by seed if you wanted to, but they also will put out these roots, underground roots, and then send up shoots. So as long as there's irrigation, as long as the soil's wet, they're going to put on more shoots, and they renovate themselves in that way. So, and then of course the fact that we did some flood irrigating meant that we had some more weed issues that we had to control, but it was a lot easier because we got to the point where, you just didn't want to put your hand down in there with all those thorns and that kind of thing. And we have things called scorpions and snakes too, and nobody really wanted to do that. So anyway, So of course it's a little difficult to see. This is one of those old,
the old days before we had digital cameras, we took these things called slides. I'm sure some of you remember, and now you can convert them to digital photographs, and so this is one of them, so it's not the greatest. But right here, you can see the weeds, and you can, in the middle of the rows, you can begin to see all the additional shoots coming up. So, but that was all right. We just went and we hoed them out if we needed to, or we let them grow into more plants. So they grew for quite a while, and actually here's an example of a main plant here, and then over there, up that direction is a new shoot coming up from the roots. There. I forgot I had that. Well, we fertilized them in the irrigation water in the typical, most easiest, cost-effective way we could, and they loved it. We used the UN 3200, which is what the citrus farmers use, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do that, but that's what we did. And we fertilized from February through October. And the biggest thing that we did is we had to prune them. And so they bear fruit on second-year wood, the floricanes, which then die. So you have the plant, it puts on flowers, and it puts on fruit, and then in the middle of the time when the fruit are growing, you have these new canes come up. And the new canes are the primocanes, and the ones with the flowers and the fruit are the floricanes. And then after you're done harvesting, those will begin to die. And those floricanes, that's the ones that had the berries, need to be taken out. I don't know if it's possible to see, maybe the next picture has a little better. And of course this was in about June. Now you could leave them in. Some people think, well, the best way to go after this, instead of pruning out all the floricanes, is to mow. They would just basically mow the entire crop. And as far as I'm concerned, well, we never actually tried that. We felt that it would be better to renovate the plant every year by getting rid of those floricanes. And we went a good number of years doing that, and it was successful. So I can't speak to the success or failure of mowing, although I know that it's done. Would you lose your bearing wood for the next year? Well, you would end up cutting down some of those primocanes, but then they would branch out. So we actually did top off the primocanes. After we removed all the fruiting wood, we ended up topping off the primocanes at 30 to 36 inches to form an additional branching to get the plants to provide more fruiting wood. So here's kind of an idea there. So you've got the floricanes down at the bottom with the fruit and the flowers, and the primocanes coming back, and then you end up cutting all those floricanes out, cutting back the primocanes, and that's what we did at Texas A&M. So, those of us from Texas A&M know that if it's done at Texas A&M, that's the way it should be done, all the time, every time, right? That's right. That's right. And if you go to that other school in Texas, that's your problem. Anyway, so anyway, here's the floricanes down here, and there's the primocanes up there, and it's very easy to tell, and then we would tip those back. Well, did we have pests and problems? Well, we had a little bit of mite problem that we took care of. We had some thrips issues that we would take care of. We had some rabbit issues. When we had one of those years where you had more of a dry spell, the rabbits like anything they can eat, and they have, I guess, tough mouths, and so they'll eat blackberries. We had some issues with sunburn, which I think can be solved easily. And but really they weren't. We would spray occasionally for mites. We put up that fence there for the rabbits, and the sunburn we just dealt with. Occasionally we had bird problems, but it wasn't a big deal. Now maybe in some other parts of the world birds would be an issue, but it typically was not for us. So just to give you an idea, so we planted in 1994. They yielded first in 1995, and we went through 2003 when we finished. We occasionally began as early as April 27th and as late as May 20th, but we averaged May 10th and lasted for 3 to 6 weeks. And you know, it is something that you have to go out and you have to prune, or you have to take your yield about 3 times a week. You know, being a university employee, it was difficult to get people to work on Saturdays or Sundays. So we would go out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, typically at 6 in the morning, and pick those berries. And as you can imagine, I became very popular among the rest of the U of A employees during that time when I would hand out free blackberries. So 3 to 6 weeks typically. It was typically closer to 6 weeks than 3 weeks. 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Yield ranges from 3 100ths to 4.37 pounds of berries per plant per year. And I remember one day when we picked over 100 pounds on one particular day. And the Texas selections did much better than the Arkansas ones, I think primarily because we didn't have enough chill hours for those Arkansas varieties. Now, there may be some other Arkansas varieties now that are a little better off, but for us, the Texas selections were much better. So, for example, this is 1 year, and so the first 4 are the Texas selections, and the last 3 are the Arkansas ones. So you can see. And eventually those Arkansas ones, they didn't get enough chill and they died. So that kind of eliminated them from the experiment. Now, it may be in areas where it's a little colder, like Tucson or some places like that, or somewhere in California, you'll be able to get by with those Arkansas selections, because some of them now are thornless. But like I say, here in the desert, I mean, hey, we have cactus and citrus and bougainvillea, so what's another thorn from that standpoint? You know. So don't take the message from this talk that those Arkansas selections aren't good. They're just not good for Yuma, okay? And they're probably not good they may not be good for parts of Phoenix. But some of the cooler parts of the state, they might actually do better. And so this is the kind of yields that we got. These are in, let's see. Yeah, so we got a lot of yield in 2000 and 2001, and then they pretty much tailed off. And this is, I don't remember what my scale is. It's disappeared. But anyway, we got, you know, there were some. I think this is pounds of fruit per plant. So I think it might not be though.
So what happened in 2002?
Well, in 2002, I think they were basically recovering from 2001. Yeah, and
were these plants all planted in 1995?
they were all planted in 1995.
Did you plant it each year?
Yeah.
So they were all alive.
Right. The Arkansas selections didn't make it, but the rest of them did all the way.
After 9 years.
Yeah. See.
Will you get into which ones tasted better than others?
You know what? I don't have a slide on that, but frankly, they all tasted good. I mean, of the 4 Texas varieties that survived, they all tasted good, really.
And could you tell them apart? Like taste test?
No. The blackberry, the quality of the sugar to acid ratios were very similar. I would say that one of the take-home messages for us is the best one for us is the Roseboro. It consistently had higher yield than the others. And so it must require quite a bit less chill than the others. The Brazos is the one that did best in Texas, where I went to school, but the Roseboro for us was better. And when you look at fruit size, the fruit size was a little bit bigger for Roseboro than some of the others. Actually, it's Brazos, and then the second one is Womack. Roseboro is the third, and Bryson is the fourth. So we got a little bit more fruit size and quite a lot more yield with the Roseboro. So why did we quit? Well, I got tired. I think it's because I got tired and we didn't have any more money to continue the project, and I figured we probably learned about as much as we've learned as we were going to learn, and you know, people got tired of going out there 3 times a week in May at 6 o'clock in the morning and picking. We picked one day from 6 in the morning till noon, you know, and that kind of for 3 of us, and so that puts a crimp into the rest of the research that one is supposed to be doing. So we learned what we needed to go learn. It was a little bit too labor intensive. We had that yield decrease. That's not to say it wouldn't have gone back up, but we did have the yield decrease. And the fruit size got a little bit smaller as time went on. But there is this farm in Yuma called Silva. Sandy and Lee Silva took this information that we did, and they really took it and they ran with it. And now they have this location called Silva's Farm where they grow blackberries and they grow peaches, and it's a pick-your-own place. And so they invite kids, school kids out and teachers, and they come out and they pick. And during the harvest season, you can go out, and they have like 9 or 10 rows, and the rows are like 400 feet long, and the blackberries, as you can see, are taller than your head. And so it's like being in a blackberry jungle. And they go through, and they are making, I think, a pretty good, successful business out of it. And I believe it's the only commercial pick-your-own, well, it's probably the only commercial blackberry farm in the state of Arizona. Certainly the only pick-your-own, I would guess, that focuses primarily on blackberries. So, yes.
I have blackberries even higher than this.
Yeah?
And the fruit is huge,
Mm-hmm.
but the form is unbelievable.
Yeah?
It's edible.
That's right.
That's why it didn't grow commercial. Because every time I get there, I can't do it with gloves, because
Yeah.
there's no feeling.
Then you think,
Every
is that
time I get
blackberry
there, I
juice
get-
or blood?
I get blood.
That's right. That's
But
exactly
huge
what.
fruit.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, the fruit's like this, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And the cane is as thick as my thumb,
Mhm.
or thicker.
Yeah, that's right. So and it kept your daughter in. Yes.
It's worth it. For me, it's worth it.
Wild, and it grows prolifically wild. Why grow
If it goes prolific, well, frankly, I think because if to keep it under control, and also because you need to be able to get your pickers in there, Yeah, to pick the next crop. Yeah, because I can imagine what would happen is you would have a mass of dead canes with the live ones in the middle of it.
I
And
heard stories in Georgia, they didn't worry about that.
well, that might be the case in Georgia, but in Arizona where it's hot, we pretty much have the canes. They're not healthy. They're not happy after they're done, so they look bad. All right, raspberries. They can be erect or trailing, and they are summer bearing, floricane bearing, or ever bearing with 2 crops a year. I have a friend who used to raise blackberries in New Mexico, near the town of Mora, which, interestingly enough, in Spanish means berry. And they use the heritage, which I believe is an everbearing. They can be red, they can be purple, black, or yellow. They're not as tolerant of high temperatures as blackberries, and they require some shade. And again, like blackberries, they can be invasive, and they're also available online through the USDA germplasm collection or at local nurseries. And I would say, as it turns out, in Yuma, you go to these big box stores and you suddenly discover that you can grow raspberries and blueberries, because you find them there, and then you put them in the ground and you find out that you really can't, at least not easily. So it's better to have some that are a little bit, that are more adaptable. And it's tough with raspberries in particular. So here's some potentials, okay? And I've eaten some of them, and I haven't eaten others. So down in Texas, we had the baba berry, and frankly, it didn't taste very good to me. I don't know if some of you tried it, but I didn't like it. Boysenberries, I think probably requires a little more chill, so there's some parts of Arizona where it would probably do well. I'm not sure that it would do well in Yuma. Dorman red, I would imagine that would do very well, because it's from the south, from Mississippi. But again, I haven't tried it. So these are potential varieties. There is some evidence there is some suggestion that heritage would work, but I don't believe it. Now, there may be parts of Arizona like Sedona, or some places a little bit further north, where heritage would work.
I bought a heritage at the Home Depot.
Yeah?
It's the one cane.
Uh-huh.
And it planted in a pot, and it had like 10.
New Zealand isn't.
Well, yeah, where's that from?
Well, Kerry is in northern New Zealand, so, they grow citrus there. So it's probably really more like something like Santa Barbara. So if you're from California, you might. So here's probably some
Go
people
back
who
to
know.
that last list of
Yeah.
berries.
pretty.
Very developed in Southern California
Yeah.
without any,
Yeah, rumor has it at the Knott's Berry Farm.
right,
So,
and that's without any chill factor at all.
well, you can't have much.
That area gets quite a bit of chill.
Does it?
Where the bacon avocados come out of, yeah, it does.
Okay.
Cold in that area.
Yeah.
Not as cold as, you know, areas to the-
Yeah. I believe there's none of the do you know, are these talks going to be available to members after the,
They're taping it for that.
okay. So I shouldn't make any political comments or anything. Yes.
The bird population varies.
You know, the birds didn't bother our blackberries, but that doesn't mean they
Were
won't.
they able to eat them and scatter their spark from the plants?
Certainly that would be, I'm imagining, be the case, but again, we didn't have a lot of bird predation in our blackberry study.
That's what it's Yuma.
Yeah, because it's Yuma and the birds, they all, no. Oh man, if you see the pigeons in my yard, you'll know that's not true. Yeah,
Your study was smooth plantings on bare ground.
On bare ground, right.
Irritable. My sod is heavy giant Bermuda root systems. Would that be a deterrent?
I would imagine it would be a deterrent in the beginning. You might want to clear off the sod at least to get them started.
Either way,
After a while, they'll more than
we can beat it up.
compete against the
Come
turf.
right up in the grass.
Yeah, they will. And you'll curse them. Now, blueberries. Boy, it would be lovely to have a blueberry. You know, and I understand now they can grow blueberries in Fresno, and so I envy. There's not many reasons to envy Fresno, but that's one of them. So, however, Visalia is a nice place. So, when I did my PhD work in East Texas, we planted them. If you've ever been to East Texas, the soil is very sandy. So sand isn't an issue. They like sand very nicely. However, they require acid soil, organic matter, and you know, if you live in southwest Arizona, you can put organic matter, and 2 weeks later you swear you never put it down because it all gets decomposed very quickly. Acidic water, fertilizer for acid-loving plants, at least a half a day of full sun, but that doesn't mean afternoon sun, at least in Yuma. Now there's one lady in Yuma who swears that she can grow blueberries outside in the yard. I suspect she acidifies her water, but most often than not, everybody else grows them in containers. And I think what's really interesting about blueberries is there's a whole lot better selection of low-chill blueberries than there used to be. So if you live in San Diego or someplace like that, you could probably put them in the yard, right?
Yeah, ours are all in containers.
In containers.
No, mine are in the dirt.
In the dirt.
And I use sulfur pellets for the acid. So you
Yeah.
don't need to have water, you just put sulfur pellets and it dissolves slowly
Uh-huh.
and keeps them acidic.
Yeah. And you know, the impetus for this, there's a very good, strong blueberry breeding program at the University of Florida, Paul Lyrene, as well as one at the USGA station in Poplarville, Mississippi. And they have built a very large collection of varieties over the years that are, I think, really exciting. At least for everybody, you know, who wants to grow blueberries in the southern part of the country. And they are available online. So here's some tips that I got from the paper in Tucson on the growing blueberries in containers. So you need to have a container that's big enough, line it with bubble wrap, keep the soil cool, and conserve water, and that's a big thing. You know, because when you consider that the heat will surround the roots on all over, basically. Pine bark, potting soil, and peat moss, and I can't emphasize enough the necessity for organic matter to be in the soil. When we used pine straw mulch or pine needle mulch, and when I was in East Texas, and we mixed it almost in a 1-to-1 ratio with the soil when we planted the berries in the ground, because they really do like a lot of organic matter. A low pH potting mix with high levels of organic matter, and those are available at least in Tucson, at local nurseries. A mulch, and then the suggestion was to add coffee grounds to acidify the soil, but you mentioned sulfur tablets.
It's easier.
And that, yeah, so if you don't drink a lot of coffee, you know, if you stay up late at night, then you can use your coffee grounds.
Coffee grounds before or after perking?
Before they're perking.
Got a lot of different pastures.
You know, now after perking, I would guess. And then one questions of whether or not one should use espresso or a light roast.
Do little Keurig cups work?
I'll have to add that to me. All right. Low pH fertilizer, suitable for azaleas. You know, there's miracid and that kind of thing. The birds love them. And more than one variety will be needed for cross-pollination. Now, I will say that we did have some blueberries at what used to be the U of A station in Waddell, Arizona. And we planted them in the ground. And they didn't do very well. And I planted some blueberries in Yuma, and they died. So I think in Arizona, at least in southern Arizona, maybe not the Tucson area, but in Phoenix and in Yuma, you're probably going to have to put them in a pot. I'm wondering if you could grow them nicer in Prescott or Payson or something like that. Yeah.
I've been growing them for about a year here.
Yeah.
And what I found is they need full shade all summer.
Yeah. Absolutely.
This time of year they grow out in full sun.
Mm-hmm.
The soil needs to be set up with peat moss to initially set the pH correctly.
Yeah.
And when the key is reverse osmosis water.
Yeah.
Nothing but. That way you don't ever have to use sulfur or something else to have to modify the
Mhm.
pH later. And it's been fantastic.
Yeah. And where do you live?
It's Strawberry St. Clair. I'm sorry?
You live where?
Levine.
In Levine.
Yeah, which is 50.
Yeah. Okay. So there's the voice of experience there. You know, Levine is near Buckeye in southwest Phoenix. So, all right. So we're for RO water. Okay. All right. So there are some very interesting varieties. I think this Sunshine Blue, only 150 chill hours. I just listed some that are fairly low chill hours. The Sunshine Blue, these are all, I believe, southern highbush varieties, which are a hybrid of the northern highbush and the rabbit eye. It's a hybrid of those two put together. Sunshine Blue is probably one of the ones that you want to look at. Snow Chaser. Sharp Blue is an old rabbit eye type. No, I'm sorry, it's a southern highbush variety. Jewel, Emerald, Misty, and Prima Donna. So up to 300 hours. So there's a lot of choices. It is my understanding that the Sunshine Blue also has the added advantage of having very nice foliage. You know, blueberries tend to, when it gets cool, their foliage turns red. And they have the nice pendulous flowers like that as well. So they're not only good as for edible, for eating the fruit, but they're also a very nice landscape plant.
Sunshine Blue is what I'm growing.
What's that, Sharp Blue?
No, Sunshine Blue is what
Sunshine Blue. And how long have they been in the ground?
Year.
Yeah? And you have got some new growth and all?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay, everybody, go out and find your local RO supplier. There you go. There's the answer. So here's some pictures. So I kind of like Jewel. It looks like those are about the size of dinner plates. You know, a big blueberry is the size of a quarter is a thing to behold.